This afternoon from the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California, it's the Roller Hockey International All-Star Game, the Eastern Conference taking on the Western Conference. And for the West, this afternoon here is the starting lineup. Rob Laurie from Anaheim in the net, Joe Cook from the Bullfrogs on the back line. Victor Gervais, also from Anaheim, will start up front, surrounded by Darren Colburn and Mark Wolf from San Jose. Robbie Laurie, 26 years of age from Lansing, Michigan, 5-1-1 this year with a .529 goals against average. For the East team, Alain Morissette from Montreal, Daniel Lara and Doug Lawrence from Orlando, Andy Rimshaw from New Jersey. Tony Szabo leading the Long Island Jaws this year will start. Here's Alain Morissette, 26 years of age from Rimouski, Quebec, 3-5-1 with Montreal, .582 goals against average. Michel Voyer is the referee. Martin Dennis and Joe Mazagowicz are the linesmen. We'll get to the rest of the lineups in just a bit, but we're set for the opening face-off. Craig Benervini, Jim Fox, great to have you with us for the third annual RHI All-Star Game. Gervais and Rimshaw, and we are underway. The East, the road team in the dark uniforms. Daniel Larin working it up, checked by Darren Colburn, and it's knocked back to the East zone. Good poke check by Victor Gervais, making a chance. Squeaks it ahead, trying to get Wolf, but Rimshaw defensively with back. Here comes the East now. Lawrence coming in, passing in front, was looking for his man Tony Szabo, could not find him. The Western Conference streaking back. Here's Wolf trying to tee up a shot and save in front by Morissette, sliding on the Colburn glass. Colburn now still hanging in front. Good quick start. We expect a lot of goals, Jim, in this one.
Offense all the way. It's an all-star game. That's the way they always are, especially in roller hockey. These guys are here to have fun, shoot the puck, and score a lot of goals.
Hey, West has something to prove. East has won the two games played in Vancouver.
They cheated.
St. Louis, chance in front, shot, score! Darren Colburn left alone in front. You know you're going to get scoring, but you certainly don't want to give it away, leaving them all alone, and the Western Conference draws first blood.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hello, friends. How's it going? My name is Tim Hanlon, as announced, and this is the little podcast that we like to call Good Seats Still Available. Yes, our curious little podcast journey each and every week, despite all rational thinking, into what used to be in professional sports. We have a great episode this week, and frankly, when do we not? Let's be honest. No, just kidding. Of course, some are better than others, but look, this one's pretty darn good. And it's one that I've been trying to get set up for quite some time, and I do not believe it'll be the last one that we focus on the topic of roller hockey, in particular, a little league in the 1990s called Roller Hockey International, or by its acronym RHI. And our guest this week is Richard Neil Graham. And he has written frankly, the quintessential tome book about the history of this very interesting, very crazy in some respects, but also very intriguing league called the RHI, Roller Hockey International. The name of the book is called Wheelers, Dealers, Pucks, and Bucks, a Rocking History of Roller Hockey International. And we're going to get into this league, which essentially was a summertime hockey pursuit, founded by a guy that comes up a lot in this show, and hopefully somebody we'll finally get to interview in the coming weeks. And his name is Dennis Murphy. You may remember him as sort of the dean, the Mount Rushmore face, if you will, among a handful of others, in a number of essential leagues and very definitional leagues, especially for this little podcast. He being a co-founder of the Old American Basketball Association, the ABA. He being a co-founder and trophy champion named after him of the World Hockey Association, the WHA. Dennis Murphy was also part of the founding of World Team Tennis, a topic that we have yet to explore, but is absolutely on our short list. But in 1993 or so, Dennis Murphy was smitten by a sport, a phenomenon, sort of emanating out of where a lot of things do emanate from in this country, culturally, Southern California, but not confined to it. This phenomenon, this little, we didn't call it a fad, but it was sort of a a white hot spark of excitement around inline roller skating and the various appendages to it. In particular, the playing of hockey. Obviously, hockey being a long time sport in winter time on ice. Of course, floor hockey or street hockey, played in sneakers and that kind of stuff. But this was sort of a combination of, I guess, the modernization of what used to be called roller skating, that being more of an inline kind of mechanics, I guess, in terms of how smooth and straight the blades run and the flexibility of such when on the wheels, plus the excitement of the sport of hockey. Push those two things together, mash them up. And that's what RHI, Roller Hockey International, was designed to be. And this was a rollicking league that spanned in its second season as many as 24 teams, count them. And we're going to get into some of that. Well, it's a little too early for that kind of expansion. But all across the country, games on ESPN2, the initial years, I guess, of the Deuce, and just an amazing assemblage of minor league ice hockey pros. You had a number of NHL veterans sprinkled throughout, and even some of the folks from the Southern California region who essentially were sort of the beach rats, if you will, of this game, this fledgling game. And we're going to get into all of it and all the fun and interesting and wacky sort of stories and storylines around Roller Hockey International with our guest, Richard Neil Graham, in just a couple of seconds. This is an eyebrow-raising episode, if there ever was one, and I encourage you to listen intently to our interview. Couple it up in a couple of seconds. Let's get some promotional things out of the way first, shall we? We'll try to pay our bills this month and keep the show going. And you can help that process by going to and partaking from or with our sponsors. One of which is oldschoolshirts.com. Oldschoolshirts.com, our friend P.F. Wilson and friends in Cincinnati. It is the place to go to find all kinds of high quality T-shirts around teams and leagues that are no longer with us for whatever reasons. And we're talking high quality stuff, and I'm willing to bet you're going to find some RHI logos amongst the wares there at oldschoolshirts.com. Look, you're also going to find things like old amusement park logos and old radio station logos and amusement parks, shopping malls, and all kinds of nostalgia from days gone by. But obviously sports, especially leagues and teams, not here anymore. Prime among them, and oldschoolshirts.com. And make sure when you go there, you use that promo code that we love to give you early and often, Good Seats, and you're going to get 10% off of all of your purchases. So go there early, go there often. Kids, why don't you? It's oldschoolshirts.com. It's spelled just like it sounds, and use that promo code Good Seats for 10% all of your purchases. And we thank P.F. Wilson and company there at oldschoolshirts.com. We also thank our West Coast friend in San Diego land, Dean Mitchell, and his site, which is also something to behold and partake into commercially, and that is sportshistorycollectibles.com. Sportshistorycollectibles.com is the quintessential place to go for all kinds of memorabilia from the teams that you loved in the past, from the leagues that you remember wistfully or lovingly, that for whatever reasons are no longer on this planet, but live on in the items and the memories of its fans and players and administrators. And you will find some amazing things, beautifully photographed. And there's clearly some items that are going to be gnawing at you to be purchased by you. And of course, once that strikes, that feeling that I must have this item or 2 or 10, you want to make sure that you use the promo code Good Seats there as well. And there at sportshistorycollectibles.com, you will get 15% off of all of your purchases. And I'm pretty certain you're going to find some Roller Hockey International stuff there too. Could it be from the Chicago Cheetahs, perhaps the Atlanta Fire Ants, maybe the Oakland Skates or the Connecticut Coasters? Don't forget the Philadelphia Bulldogs or the Minnesota Blue Ox, the New Jersey Rock and Rollers, the Anaheim Bullfrogs, Calgary Rads. Who knows? Just you name the team. There are dozens more that I haven't even named yet. But give a look at sportshistorycollectibles.com. I'm pretty sure you're going to find something from the old RHI. Use that promo code GoodSeats. 15% off will be yours. And we thank them, Dean Mitchell and friends, there for their patronage and their sponsorship of our show, too. All right. So we have dutifully done that. We now segue nice and smooth, into our enlightening conversation. Live from a boat off the coast of San Diego, we are joined by Richard Neil Graham, the author of the amazing book about the RHI, Wheelers, Dealers, Pucks, and Bucks, the rollicking history of roller hockey international. Here is our chat right now. Obviously, roller hockey, the 1990s. This is a melange of storylines here, and we'll get to some of them, including perhaps the patron saint of it in a second. But before we go in any of that, tell our audience who you are and how you got involved in. I guess what I would imagine is the quintessential story behind this thing called Roller Hockey International.
Well, I had been playing roller hockey at the beach in Santa Monica for years, and I think that once it really got going in the late 80s, I would say 88, 89, I was playing out there before it became a national phenomenon. And I had been working for a sports magazine called Triathlete Magazine, where I'd covered the swim, bike, run event. And I got let go there in, I think it was June of 91, and I did some freelancing for a while. And then I got into Roller Hockey Magazine as an editor. That would have been, I was there for about, I'm going to say a year and a half before I was asked to take a job for a company called Sports and Fitness Publishing out of Boulder, Colorado, and create a competing publication to Roller Hockey Magazine, which was called Inline Hockey News. So I was writing about the sport when it was just amateur play. The covers of the magazine would be of guys playing roller hockey at the beach, for example, all guys that I knew. And it was actually called Street Hockey when I came on board, Street Hockey Magazine, and I convinced them that they had to change the name to Roller Hockey because it was just obvious that was the way things were going. There had been people playing out in the street with tennis shoes and stuff for a long time in places like Canada, where I grew up. And that was another connection. My love for hockey had been born in me in Canada, and my family moved to California in 1968. So I was one of the guys that would be like just skate. When rollerblades first came out, I would skate around in Venice Beach, which is just south of Santa Monica, at night with a hockey stick and a ball, and it would be embarrassing to do it in the daytime. And so I was there. I was positioned for when Dennis Murphy got his idea to start Roller Hockey International, and David McLean got his idea to start another league that was similar, but was based in one location in Disney World in Florida. And eventually those two leagues merged. McLean came to RHI, but I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit.
Well, sure. So, but it seems to me that, correct me if I'm wrong, that Southern California in particular, the beach communities a la Venice and maybe Santa Monica and who knows, probably a bunch of others, was almost the, I don't know, the birth or the cradle of this sort of inline skating plus the beach kind of thing. Is that fair to say?
I think it's very fair to say. And we had 6 or 7 different games going on in the parking lot in Santa Monica. We had the two best surfaces we called A court and B court, and occasionally somebody would park in the middle, and then they'd come back from the beach and we'd go, hey, would you mind moving your car to the edge? And most people were fine with moving their cars because they didn't want to get dinged with the ball. And we had people coming, let's say people come from different countries to visit California, and then they happened to see what's going on, and they could go borrow a rent inline skates, roller hockey skates, and join us. So I remember people from Switzerland and Sweden and Canada and France all joining us in playing in the kind of the international language of hockey. You didn't really need to speak too much except say, "Hey, pass me the ball." And we had such great fun. But there were times when there were 6 or 7 different games going on in different parts of the parking lot, and it was just huge. And that's when Dennis and David McLean both got their ideas to get into the sport professionally. David said he saw kids playing in Santa Monica where I played, and Dennis saw kids playing in the street on inline hockey skates or roller skates. Kind of, you can use both terms. And he asked the kids what they call what they're doing, and they said roller hockey. And he thought, man, this could be a great idea for professional sport. And as you know, he had done several leagues previous to that, so he kind of had a feeling and an insight into what could possibly work.
Well, let's get into that a little bit because obviously you're sort of in a unique position, both geographically as well as career-wise, right? Because you're a scribe, you're focused with these back in the day when actual monthly interest magazines existed, right, and was kind of like the main source of information about things. It seems like you were well positioned to kind of be eyes and ears for sort of this sort of bigger picture that was developing, but based on, and obviously hence the book, right, ultimately.
Right.
So give me a sense from your understanding, your reporting, your knowledge and understanding of Dennis Murphy, right? So first of all, in your mind, your words, who is Dennis Murphy for those uninitiated in our audience, which may, hopefully is not the case because we certainly have made allusions to Mr. Murphy, almost one of the kings, I guess, if you will, of challenger and forgotten leagues. And maybe then we can segue into how you think he sort of stumbled across this phenomenon, I guess, of inline skating and putting his background and that phenomenon into action.
Well, he had been involved with the World Hockey Association as a co-founder. And the American Basketball Association, long before he got into roller hockey. So he knew everyone. He was a part owner of this LA, I think he was part of the LA Sharks that played in the Los Angeles Sports Arena for the WHA. And he also had some part ownership in one of the teams in the ABA. So he knew people from not only professional sports, but politics, because he had been the mayor of Buena Park for a couple of years. So he knew all the top stars in the leagues. He was friends with Gordie Howe, for example, and Bobby Hall in hockey, and Julius Erving, and all the top stars in basketball, Jerry West, and of course Jerry Buss, who owned the Los Angeles Lakers, was a good friend of his. And again, I might get ahead of myself a little bit here, but he asked Jeannie Buss to that he told her that they were going to start a team, Los Angeles Blades, and he wanted her to run it. She was kind of taken aback, but his knowledge of everybody in American sports and in politics really stood him in good stead.
Yeah, well, it's also interesting too because obviously he had been responsible for either wholly or partially for not only the WHA and the ABA, topics that we've talked about in previous episodes, including people like Pat Boone talking about how Dennis Murphy was instrumental in getting him or convincing him to be one of the first owners of an ABA team. And it frankly almost wrecked him, both emotionally and then certainly financially. But he, of course, has said he wouldn't have done it any other way. But also World Team Tennis, right, which that Dr. Buss was very much behind and involved in. And my sense is that Jeannie, who was obviously in our ever-growing short list of people to talk to. It was almost like I want to say her pet project from Jerry, but the idea of truly getting her stripes, if you will, in running something professional in and around the forum through the RHI and what Murphy was bubbling up here.
Well, that's exactly right, and she's someone that you definitely have to speak to. Did you say you already had, or you still want to?
No, she's on the list, and I've actually promoted her Audible book in some of our advertising, because she does have an Audible book about her life story, but I have not reached out. But I will follow up after this conversation for sure. Good,
because I have her information for you, and she'd love to talk to you. She's very, very friendly that way and open, and she did love the Blades in the league. She exactly did use it as she had been involved with World Team Tennis and knew certain things, but I don't know that she ran the team out of LA, the tennis team, but she sure did run the Blades, and she's one of the top 2-3 leaders in the sport in terms of ownership and how their team was viewed by the public. Just a professional class all the way, and people have the greatest respect for her knowledge, ability, insights. She brought a lot to Roller Hockey International, and there's some fun stories in the book about her and her kind of head conflicts with the ownership of the Anaheim Bullfrogs, which were the greatest rival to the Blades in Southern California at the time. Some fun stories, and she could probably give you a lot of insight into that sort of thing.
Well, so hopefully this episode will prove worthy of that introduction. So let me ask you this: so how does a guy like Murphy, who, depending on your perspective, has either have a huge track record of success or checkered history of pockmarked failures, right, with leagues, right, and the ABA, successful in ultimately forcing a merger and changing the dynamics of pro basketball with the NBA? Yeah, probably. World Team Tennis, intriguing. Open up opportunities for other players and sort of the current or the then process of pro tennis, certainly, but it was kind of limping along in sort of a second sort of life by that point. And WHA, right, which was itself also successful yet not so. How does somebody like Murphy, with that kind of checkered and or not checkered, but a debatable background, convince people, especially smart ones like arena owners like the Bus family, that this inline hockey thing, RHI, is a legit thing, and believe me, this is going to work?
Well, that's an excellent question, and Jeannie would probably be a better person to ask that one, but in terms of specific getting teams to or owners to buy teams. But in general, I think it's because he had the gift of gab. He was a good salesman, and he was very adept at bringing various types of people together to fulfill a dream that he had. And I think on the other side of it, there were people who were business owners that wanted to be involved with sports. Let's say if you ran a widget company, it's you're making a lot of money perhaps, but it's not very exciting. And here's a way to hobnob with star athletes and the fans and the politicians. Everybody was attracted to the sport. I remember that it was hugely popular once it got going, RHI, and there were 12 teams that first year, and then they expanded to 24. So he got people excited about the possibilities, and I think a lot of them really didn't go in fully informed of what it could cost them. And a lot of them did get burned. So when you talk about kind of spotty record with teams coming and going, that's definitely true. And I wouldn't say there's a sucker born every minute, but there's a budding sports entrepreneur born every second. And those people want to have their hands in a professional sports team. And so there was fertile ground for Murph's ideas.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's clearly a theme that has bubbled up on a number of different occasions in different sort of forms and facets, right? In our little journey into these kinds of things, it always seems to be, and by the way, it seems to keep regenerating, right? So, we got 2 new football leagues apparently starting up next year, one in the spring and the rebirth of the XFL the following year. This just seems to be that no shortage of, I don't know, call them big boys and their toys or just people, frankly, now, women as well. Thank goodness, it's a heady mixture of ego and excitement, and it certainly cures boredom for perhaps how they originally got their money, and a play toy or play thing. So let me sort of get some sense of how you think, or what was your sort of vision or understanding of how the pieces came together to kind of get players and these arenas. I mean, I think around this time too, we've had a couple of conversations around another sports league in that period of time in the 90s that from a business perspective, I think you were hinting at it, was designed in some form to fill arenas during the summer. That's the Continental Indoor Soccer League, playing a summer schedule. I suspect that a little bit of the RHI pixie dust was helping some of these arena owners fill some gaps during the lull, I guess, of the summertime when arenas are looking for stuff beyond just concerts and waiting for the hockey and basketball seasons to start up again.
Well, that's very accurate. And there are also venues that were created specifically for RHI. There was a couple of outdoor rinks that teams played on. The Utah Rollerbees played on an outdoor rink, and there's a game up in Sacramento where they experimented with an outdoor league, and it was at night, so the lights were attracted to the bugs were attracted to the lights, and then they'd fall onto the court, and then the players would roll over them and squish them, and they'd be slipping and sliding on the bugs. And Jeannie Buss said it was just a disaster. So not only was it good for filling arenas in the summertime, but it also created venues that eventually were either covered or not used anymore. But it was a heady time, and it just seemed like the sky was the limit for professional roller hockey in the early days.
Where is the idea coming from? Where are the players coming from? We've got obviously some strong arena owners and some people behind it. Centrally owned, or is it a franchise model? Maybe some of the basics of how you sort of saw this thing coming together, or Murphy saw this. Well,
it was a franchise model, and they sold franchises for a nominal fee when they first started. I'm thinking it was $25,000 a team. And then to get the players, it was originally thought that, especially by the guys that I played with at the beach, that they'd be some of the pro players, and a few of them were. But what Chris McSorley of the Anaheim Bullfrogs realized that very first summer that they played was that the minor league ice hockey players would be better once they learned to skate on wheels than the guys that were playing pickup roller hockey at the beach, because this was a full contact league and they would be hitting. And I remember stories of guys that I knew that played roller hockey at the beach that would go in for a tryout and just get wrecked with a hard check and not even go back. So I think that once McSorley made that decision and people started catching on, the next year, the first year they went to the league undefeated and were the champions, soon the other teams picked up on that, and they started getting players from the American Hockey League and Central Hockey League and all these different ice hockey leagues, where the guys could make a certain chunk of change during the summer where normally they might have to go home and work at their father's farm or meat packing plant, things like that people had to do. minor pro hockey players back then. And so some of these guys were making $8-10 grand for a summer playing a sport and traveling around the United States and Canada.
How were those salaries derived? My understanding is that there was a bit of some innovation, I guess, if you will, in terms of how the players got compensated a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, based on performance and or winning in competition versus sort of straight salary. Was there any uniqueness that you knew or could tell about how the players were, I guess, inexpensively compensated?
Well, they were supposedly being paid, trying to think if it's been such a long time. Oh my gosh, 93 when they had that first R8 size season. What are we talking now? 25 years. But they did have a salary structure, a pay per play, per game that the players got. But guys like McSorley and others quickly found that if they paid some of the players under the table, they'd really pique their interest. I remember one guy saying, "I'm not going to play for this much a week. I'm too good." and if the teams wanted that player, they would have to pay him under the table, and that was definitely an issue for the teams that didn't want to do that. They wanted to follow the rules. Eventually, other teams had to do that to compete. So some of the players might have been ostensibly supposed to make $4 grand a summer and ended up making like 10, for example.
So how rampant was that sort of under the table stuff? And I can't imagine that would, aid in the stability, given that certain franchises might be more capable of doing such things versus others.
Right. It was definitely a boon to the teams that had a more solid financial background than some of the guys that came in and didn't have the deep pockets. I think that Jeannie Buss was saying the league needed to go for 10 years for anybody to even think of making much money. And her idea was that the kids that were 15 and 16 years old, that were a huge part of the fan base at that time, would be 26 or 28, and then have kids of their own, and those kids would grow up being roller hockey players and roller hockey fans and build the sport from the ground up. And it did have a negative impact when teams would come and go because they couldn't afford to play under those circumstances.
So how about the rules? What were the rules that were being thrown in front of these potential and then ultimately current then players? Because they were obviously different, somewhat substantially, and actually in some cases not so, from the traditional ice hockey game that we all kind of know and grew up with.
Well, ice hockey, as you know, has the center red line and then the two blue lines separating the court into offensive zone, defensive zone, and neutral ground in between the two blue lines. And the RHI did away with blue lines, and all you had to do was for at the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, you had to carry the puck across the red line before you could pass it, so it wouldn't have a lot of cherry picking. And they also had 4 skaters and a goalie rather than 5 skaters as in ice hockey, which opened the court more and made it for a higher scoring game. I mean, some of the games early on were like 13-7, whereas in ice hockey, most scores would have been along the lines of 4-2 or 5-3 or 1-0 or even more shutouts.
Would you attribute that to that open space, or is it maybe because the inline skates were a little bit easier to sort of control, say, versus skating on ice, or what other factors maybe that helped? Would you say open up the scoring more so than regular?
Well, I think that getting rid of the blue line stopped that offsides rule that stopped play all the time. So there was continuous play, and I think that the open space did mean a lot. So you could make long passes and get guys open for breakaways and things like that. It's a very good question. I think about why was it so high scoring. They wanted it to be for the fans. They didn't want 1-0 games, and fortunately they never got them. There was only one shutout as far as I'm aware, in the entire history of the league. And that was a guy from Calgary Rads, played 1 year and happened to get a shutout. And so there was more scoring, but that's a good question. I have to think about that a little bit more. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
The puck was also different, too. Wasn't that lighter and a little bit more zippy, I guess, perhaps, than a regular black ice hockey puck?
Right, and because most of the teams played on either a plastic sport court or concrete, a regular ice hockey puck would not glide along the surface as well as the puck that was created for the league, which had little nibs on it or little protrusions to lift the body of the puck off the court a little bit, so there was a little bit of airflow there, just like the air hockey game, in a sense, where you've got that little bit of air underneath the puck. It makes it go, whereas on the ice, it's sliding on ice. So that was a way to create a puck for the league that was proprietary and supposed to gain income for the league, the entire league, and go to the teams. But unfortunately, that was another error on the part of the leadership of RHI, and they let one man take the lead on that, and he put the puck's patent in his own name rather than the league's, and that caused a huge rift and a lot of problems over the years.
Interesting. Well, so that seems a little similar to the old ABA basketball approach that perhaps...
Exactly. Yep.
Very interesting.
I think Murphy... I think Dennis Murphy said that was probably the biggest mistake that he made, and it just... I was the hardest chapter I had to write in my book because Alex Bellehumer, who was one of the co-founders, the four of the guys that put the league together initially, I got to be careful how you talk about certain people because some people are too happy. And I actually wrote the chapter and then sent it to him, and he just went over and over every little single detail. He argued with everything that I said, and that I had, I talked to a good chunk of people to get a basic idea of what was going on, and he said, no, that's not true. And it was the most difficult thing that I had to write in a 360-page book. And it caused the most angst for me, and obviously later for him. And it's a black league, so a black mark on the league, and it's just a shame because that was one of the things that Jeannie Buss says in her intro to my book. She wrote the foreword, and in her own book, Laker Girl, where she talks about a man who did that, put the puck in his own name, reaped over $1 million in benefits to himself that could have gone to the league and had kept it afloat.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's also interesting, too, because it's also, in many cases, to talk about, that is true sports innovation, right? I mean, way ahead of its time, that idea of creating something proprietary that could be an ongoing annuity, if you will. But it also, though, was a bet, I guess, on, what the thought was going to be sort of a long-term growth and boom in this inline skating thing generally, right? And the desire at the kid and street level to emulate what was starting on the professional ranks with roller hockey as a sport.
Oh, it's absolutely right. And those pucks sold like hotcakes, and they weren't cheap. I remember some of them, I think $5 to $7, where you get a hockey puck for 50 cents, ice hockey puck. But they sold over the course of the years many, many thousands of those pucks. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I could look them up and tell you later. But that was a big income stream. And it was sadly largely diverted.
All right, just when it was getting interesting, let's put the brakes on this conversation just for a minute, shall we? But do want to tell you about our friends at MyBookie, and we are in the midst of pro and college football season, and boy, oh boy, it's the time when the wagerers come out. And I have no divine insight into who's going to win games. I certainly have my hunches, especially in the college game, which I follow a little bit more closely than the pro game, believe it or not. But look, if you think you know, and you're looking for an excuse to get online and maybe take advantage of some of the good wagering and the winnings to be had, well, you got to check out MyBookie. Our friends MyBookie, that's mybookie.ag. And indeed, they are probably the best in the business. They've been in business for years. They've got a ton of great reviews online, and they've got a really easy-to-use mobile site. And look, the idea is pretty straightforward, right? You're looking for a decent and well-lit place to do your betting, and you want good customer service. Well, MyBookie's got you covered. MyBookie.ag. They've got in-game live betting, over-unders on fantasy points scored, and by all accounts, the most rewarding player perks in the business. And look, it's because it's football season, they've been slammed with new orders, new bettors, new people getting the deposits online, and they've got an extra bonus for our listeners that I'd love you to check out. So as you may remember from previous episodes, the basic benefit that is available to you when you use the promo code SEATS, you will get a dollar-for-dollar match on your initial deposit all the way up to $1,000. So meaning, if you put in $1,000, they're going to give you $1,000 of credit in addition to that. So that's basically doubling your money that you can put to work, and that's a good deal in and of itself. Now, ain't it? However, if you're willing to wait until after 7 o'clock Eastern Time, because they are so slammed with orders that are and deposits coming in, if you can wait till after 7 o'clock Eastern Time, and you can adjust your promo code to add the number 25, that is SEATS25, you will get in addition $25, assuming your initial deposit's over 100. You're going to get 25 extra bucks to play. So that's a double word score, if you will, if you're sort of Scrabbleizing life. And that is all from our friends at MyBookie. It's mybookie.ag, where you can enter the promo code SEATS25 after 7 o'clock Eastern Time and get not only the dollar-for-dollar match up to $1,000 for from your initial deposit, but also an extra $25, assuming that your initial deposit's over 100, to your account. So it's your choice. You got sort of two ways to kind of incentivize yourself to get involved and enjoy that courtesy of us and our friends at MyBookie. That's mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid. All right, that's the tagline. We love it, and we love them. Thanks so much to MyBookie, and thank you for continuing to listen. And here is part 2 of our conversation. Look, give our audience a sense of the actual play. You mentioned there was an inequality in surfaces. I find it, I guess, 25 years later, right, in hindsight, but I find it hard to believe that players would agree to play on actual concrete, smooth as it might be. Certain outdoor pro players or even indoor soccer players, right? Playing on, what is derisively called over the years as fuzzy concrete right now. Obviously, those surfaces have gotten better over time, but sounds a little dangerous to me. I guess I could see sort of, a covered sort of flat surface without ice, but the concrete purely seems a little risky to me.
Well, I think that it only happened in the first year or so, and I think that it might have been mandated that the teams had to have the plastic sport court after the first year. Again, it's going back a ways in my memory bank, but I don't think that the players really minded. There were times when they would fall, but they're padded up by a hockey player, and they're pretty well protected, and they're wearing helmets. So I think that their enjoyment of the game and the chance to be paid, they would have played on almost any surface. They might have complained, but it was just too good to pass up. And a lot of these guys would come out from, like, say, Detroit and in the Midwest and come out and play. So I don't think that I remember hearing a lot of complaints about, oh, we're going to get hurt on the concrete. I think that they just loved the game and they loved playing it, and their enthusiasm was communicable, and I think that the fans were excited to see them play and learn a lot about minor leagues that, I hadn't followed the minor league hockey very much. I know a lot of hockey people do, and I do more now. I'm a season ticket holder for the San Diego Gulls, for example. But I didn't know about a lot of these teams and their histories. And I get to meet some of these players and talk to them over the years, and all great guys. 99 out of 100 of them were just great guys and fun to talk to, and had a million stories. If you've read my book, that was one of the things that I wanted to get across, was just the pure joy of the play and the fun stories after the games. And guys a lot of times would go out to a restaurant after the game, and the fans would be there, and they'd mingle, and it was good times. It was a lot of fun. And guys at the magazines that I worked with really thought the sky was the limit, and we were kind of taken a little bit unawares because we didn't know perhaps that, some teams were kind of had a built-in advantage, or were paying players under the table or things like that right off the bat. And it just seemed like, okay, yeah, some teams dropping off, but they were in small venues and didn't have the backing, the financial backing. And we thought that, okay, you start with 10 teams, and then they made a mistake. I actually had 12 teams. They started with 12 teams, and then they jumped to 24 the next year. And a lot of people tell Murph that was a mistake, that they expanded too fast. But he said they needed those franchise fees from the second year to keep the league going. And I'm sure that that's accurate.
Well, look, we've heard that story and that line before, right? Where and this is the battle, the constant tension between the sort of central ownership approach, which obviously makes the franchise owners less independent, shall we say, right? It becomes more, but yeah, longer term, it tends to be a better model because you're spending time nurturing, one for all for one, something over a period of time that could be strengthened and possibly then, separated into actual franchises. But that wasn't Murph's history, right? I mean, the ABA, the WHA. I'm a little less knowledgeable about how the structure worked in World Team Tennis, but I assume it was fairly similar, where franchise fees made up, part of the financial model, and or to some people's disdain, a pyramid scheme, right? To keep the dollars coming in while you tried to build something underneath it. And I don't know. It also seems like he's probably trying to continue to take advantage of this general inline skating craze that was part of the 1990s culture at the time.
Well, I think he stated it very accurately and very well. That's all true, and you can look at it two ways. Okay, maybe it was a bit of a Ponzi scheme, but would have it been as successful as it was over the course of the 5 or 6 years that the league ran if that hadn't been the way they did it? I think that people would say at the time, gosh, it's too bad that Bill Gates doesn't just buy the league and run it the right way. Well, he wasn't interested, and so it was done the way it was because that's how Murph had operated in the past. It worked to a good degree. I mean, when WHA was founded, players left the NHL and got a huge pay raise right off the bat, and that helped the league get its notoriety with Bobby Hull signing the $1 million contract and Gordie Howe coming over and things like that. It really gave the league some instant credibility at the same time where they had these weak franchises that couldn't last a season. So there's definitely positive and negatives to the approach that Murphy and his partners chose.
Yeah, so many questions. You mentioned sort of the almost like the lunch pail, I guess, nature of a lot of the players, right? Sort of milling around with the fans after the games kind of thing. And I think it's also probably, we've talked about this a little bit with the founder of the Arena Football League, Jim Foster, over a number of different conversations. And, it's almost like they're more relatable, some of these players, right? Because they are, while they're not making a ton of dough, they are, they're out there playing out for the fans, but then, because they're not, in these gigantic salaries and sort of this rarefied air, I guess, professionally, they can, it's something that the fans can relate to and arguably keep coming back to and get behind, especially given its nascency as a sport.
Oh, that's exactly right. And, one thing that Jeannie Buss did was had the players after the game sign autographs at a table in the court, and people could come down onto the court and get autographs at the players at the tables. And one of the players said, "I don't want to do that. I'm a professional and I'm a star and I don't need to do this." And she said, "Well, okay, what we'll do is we'll take your number off your back and no one will know who you are and they won't want your autograph, and I'll solve that." And he quickly backed down and signed his autograph. She's a very, very smart woman. And so it was accessible. And then some of these guys, they would come down at the beach and play pickup roller hockey with us. So Steve Bogievis of the Los Angeles Blades and Stephane Desjardins, who played for a couple different teams, were guys that had played with us down at the beach. And they were our friends. And so we went to watch some of our friends play pro roller hockey, and it was a blast. I mean, I never personally had any dreams of playing in the league. I was, I was in love with hockey from, early age, but I never was all that good. So I didn't have any kind of aspirations to it. So since I wasn't going to play, it sure was fun to watch. And of course I played, the pickup roller hockey for years at the beach and then in leagues. And it was a great, great part of my life. I don't play it right now, partly because I'm in San Diego and I'm living on a boat and I've got other priorities. I'm just painting the boat. It took me forever. I recently painted the top and I want to try to buff out the sides next. So I've got other focuses now, but that was just a wonderful time in my life. And I always enjoy hearing people who've read my book saying, "Gosh, it's the Bible of pro roller hockey." And nobody's ever really written another book on that sport because I think I covered it well enough that there's not really a need. So I'm proud of the book, and I'm proud of my time in the sport. I'm still friends with Dennis Murphy. I see him once a month or so up where he lives up near the Anaheim area. I'm down in San Diego, so it takes me a couple hours to get up there and visit with him. We have lunch. Sometimes we'll bring in other people who were involved in his leagues and chat. And he's still sharp. He's just about 91 years old though now.
What give me a sense of what was your perception of the NHL's opinion of this league and maybe some of their players possibly playing in it? Was there any relationship or acknowledgement or anything visceral between the two?
There was. Some of the more forward-looking NHL teams, like the Vancouver Canucks, had a guy named Joe Carbonneau who played in the league and was a leading scorer. And the way they looked at it was that he would get great physical conditioning during the summer and come right into training camp ready to go, where in the past, a lot of the NHL players would pretty much take the whole summer off and come in out of shape and play themselves into shape during the preseason. And this didn't happen a lot anymore once they started bringing an influx of some of these guys that were ice and inline hockey players. I think their emphasis was still on the ice, but they'd had a good time playing in the summers in RHI. And I think that, like the Vancouver Canucks, they would have connections with the local team. And Vancouver, it was the Voodoo. And eventually they bought the team. So some of the forward-looking people at NHL like the idea. But then you've got the Neanderthals or the people that don't like to see change, and they just thought it was a dumb knockoff of ice hockey, and they didn't want anything to do with it. But there were some forward-looking people in the league that made certain things like NHL Breakout, which were summer roller hockey events where it'd be a tournament format, and you'd have kids from 6 years old up to adults playing and winning championships in their individual divisions. I played in those several times in Santa Monica and once in San Jose, and it was just a blast. I remember getting a hat trick and one of my teammates throwing his helmet out in the rink. So it was just a great time, Timothy.
So how about some of the names of these franchises? And I'll get into some of the better ones and the weaker ones in a minute. But again, the timing, this is around the time of ESPN2, right? And it's sort of the action sports thing, and the beginnings or the primordial ooze, I guess, if you will, of things like the X Games and those kinds of things becoming more mainstream. But my oh my, some of these logos and names of teams. I mean, I'm just coming up with Minnesota Blue Ox. Okay, that seems somewhat, but the Denver Daredevils, the Calgary Rads. That's RAD''Z.
Right.
What was was there any sort of coherent thinking behind these names and these logos and stuff? It was obviously trying to attract, I guess, a certain type of action fan.
Yeah, I think they were going after the kids to a large extent, teenagers and even younger, with names like that. I don't know that the league had much to say about how a team was going to be named. I don't know that they could have, but the teams tried to do things in a regional manner if they could. There was the Edmonton Sled Dogs, for example, and Long Island Jaws, and Buffalo Stampede, was just funny. People thought it was more like Wings. That would be a better connection. There was a Buffalo Wings later in the league, but they had some fun names and fun teams, and some logos that were better than others. I thought that some were fairly juvenile. But some of the good ones I would put up against a lot of the NHL logos. The Pittsburgh Phantoms had a really neat logo, and the LA Blades was very sharp and clean, as was the San Jose Rhinos with a charging rhino. And then you had the Vancouver Voodoo, it had a kind of a witch doctor with a hockey stick at the top of the V. And a mask in the middle of the logo, voodoo related. So I think that they did a darn good job. I mean, we'd make fun in the magazines of the different teams that we thought were weak, but we'd praise the teams and the names and the logos that we liked. And I think that that's one thing that I feel proud about, is that we consider ourselves journalists, and we didn't want to suck up to the ownership of the league. And I remember Dennis Murphy getting irritated with me sometimes. He goes, "Yeah, it's too hard of questions, mellow out." And he always, every time he sees me, he says something like that. You're too mean back in the day. But we wanted to have the league succeed, and so we asked the tough questions sometimes, and sometimes they weren't appreciated, but we did our jobs. And again, it was an honor to be involved from my perspective. I got to meet a lot of great people. Like the commissioner of the league was Ralph Backstrom. He was the rookie of the year, like in the year I was born. And he was just a very classy gentleman. Really enjoyed meeting him. And then you'd meet the parents of the players, because they'd be at the games in the stands with you. So I met Steve Bogavis' father, who was a big Studley motorcycle rider and had his own interesting stories and things like that. And then the players, a lot of times when there were different world championships tournaments that they'd play in, and they played in a couple in Anaheim, and I would go and hang out with the players, after the game, and they'd drinking beers and playing guitars and just having a blast. So it was one of the high points of my career.
Give me a sense of the some of the teams that were in your mind, the strongest and most solid and stable, and maybe a few examples of some of the more, shall we say, comical or ill-fated or ill-advised that you can remember? You mentioned Anaheim. They seem to be one of the stellar ones, no?
Yes, they were. They had pretty solid ownership with some money behind them. They knew how to market the sport. They really promoted their first game at the Anaheim Arena, which became known as the Pond before it became Honda Center. And before that, it was Arrowhead Pond. But people would call it the Pond, and that was before the Anaheim Mighty Ducks came into the league. That was the summer before that. So it was funny, guys would come getting ready to play in that first year for Anaheim Mighty Ducks, and people would go, "Oh, you guys the roller hockey players?" And they go, "No, what are you talking about?" But I think that Anaheim was one of the stronger franchises. LA was, because they had the financial backing. The San Jose Rhinos were a solid team. But then you had teams like the Connecticut Coasters, who played in an old arena, didn't have much financial backing. I think that they didn't really have an owner, so the league propped them up, and that only lasted one season. The Portland Rage had a good team, but didn't have the financial wherewithal to continue more than, I think, 1 or 2 years. There was a team in Oklahoma, had a couple different names. If you didn't have deep pockets as an owner, you were going to lose your shirt. And a lot of these guys did, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, that seems to be always the issue too. It's like, well, I can afford a franchise, low cost fee, but I'm not necessarily certain I'm going to be able to cover the costs during the year, and obviously they tend to be more costly than originally envisioned. You mentioned sort of this expansion. I mean, 12 teams to start the 1993 season, and then doubling to 24. I mean, by all accounts, right? That is just supremely aggressive. How much was television, as far as you remember, part of this mixture? I know ESPN2 was sort of coming online, so to speak, and I know that there was a little bit of coverage in that first year, I think, including it wasn't the first ever game at the league. I think it was the second, the day after at the Anaheim Pond, their opening game. How much do you know? What was any of that driven by television and/or desire for a national footprint, or do you think it was just a money grab, so to speak, to kind of keep the league going and on the illusion, perhaps, that it was successful and growing fast?
No, I think that it was something that David McLean brought to the league. He had the connection with ESPN, with his World Roller Hockey League, WRHL, that played in Florida, like I said, at Disney World. And they played in one venue, and they had it taped by ESPN. I can't remember if ESPN2 was even around at the time. So when his league folded, he came to the RHI, and he brought the television connection with him. And so they did have good TV coverage. I remember there was a Canada-U.S. exhibition game the summer before the league started, and it had coverage, and Luc Robitaille was one of the announcers, a player for the LA Kings. And the next year, they had a lot of the games would have been on TV. I can't remember if it was the second year, a bit more than the first, but that was something that we'd all watch and talk about. And ESPN did a very good job of covering the league and making the players into personalities. And they had Jim Fox on the shows with Craig Minervini as a play-by-play announcer, and Jim would do the color commentary on, for example, a championship game between the San Jose Rhinos and the Montreal Roadrunners one summer. It was very well done, and they had a good opportunity to keep that going. But I think with the teams coming and going, there's some issues. And, there was I think some of the teams would pay like a local sponsor that would conflict with the national sponsor, and that really turned ESPN off. I think that I can't remember if it was Pepsi was one of the league sponsors, and then the local team, put Coke around the boards, things like that. So there was some short-sightedness, and there was, some wild west philosophy along some of the teams.
Based on your reporting in this book, and it's a hoot. The whole thing is a hoot.
Thank you.
When did you, in your narrative, and perhaps maybe through the eyes of the participants, when did the wheels look like they were literally and figuratively starting to come off? Was it as early as that doubling of expansion size in year 2, or?
I don't think right at that point it was. I mean, we thought it was exciting. We were thrilled that there were more teams and there'd be more events to go to. Some of the teams that came in that second year were some of the teams that lasted throughout the league. They lasted longer. So they did replace some weaker franchises with some stronger ones. That was good, but they did spread themselves too thin, and they had different issues. And I think that they lost something like 7 of those 24 teams the next year. So it was feast and famine at the same time, and a very, very complicated way to do business. And I don't know how it could have been done another way, unless you had 12 teams owned by millionaires or multimillionaires who were willing to lose money for several years before you brought in new teams, and you wouldn't need those new franchise fees. But I think that a lot of the owners who maybe lost $300,000 in the first year weren't all that excited about losing $500,000 the second year, and took off. And so, but that would probably be the weakest element of my knowledge of the league, is the financial dealings. It was, something that we didn't delve into all that much. We were more interested in the play on the court.
Well, it almost seems too that you have to think about too where revenues are being derived from, right? So, I mean, when you're a fledgling league, and let's say television isn't, front and center, or at least envisioned as part of the roadmap. I'm sure TV was, but I think it took a couple of years to really sort of get on a semi-regular fixture on an ESPN2 or something along those lines. But I mean, there's things like regional games and radio broadcasts and all those. I mean, those are ancillary revenue streams, right? That can make up for perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 people rattling around a stadium. Now, obviously, Anaheim doing better than that, but there were certainly a whole bunch of teams that were maybe at that or even below that on certain nights.
You're absolutely right.
Right, you can't pay people with concessions on $2,500 in the stands.
No, that's true. So some of the teams that couldn't draw for whatever reasons, maybe their location or they didn't market well enough, they might have had 2,000 fans at a game. I was fortunate, I lived in LA, so I would go to most of the games in LA and Anaheim. And Anaheim started out that opening night with almost a full house, or over 13,000 people. And LA, they averaged consistently 7,000 to 8,000 people, I think, the first couple of years. And it was, from what I saw, it looked like it could do very well. I wasn't living in say, Oklahoma or Connecticut, where they had teams that had, very few fans. So we knew they existed, but we thought, okay, well, they'll get shaken out, and they did. But a lot of times the teams that came in to replace them weren't on much more solid financial footing.
All right, so as we round the corner here, give me a sense of if you were to sort of encapsulate what this league was about and sort of its storyline. I mean, maybe a little bit of like what was its sensibility? It seems like it kind of came and went, and some of it was sort of born of sort of a fad. Yet it seems to me like there was some real good stuff there, including camaraderie and an exciting game. And filling arenas, which had a nice business element to it. This wasn't all for naught, was it?
No, I don't think it was. A lot of the people that still talk about it wish that certain things had been done differently by the league ownership. The puck is a huge, issue for a lot of people, where that money could have gone to the league. I know that Larry King, who was one of the founders with Dennis on World Team Tennis, was just furious that the puck was put in another man's name instead of the league's. And there was ample revenue from that puck during the years where the league was going and could have used that money to maybe either prop up some of the weaker teams or entice stronger ownership because they were more solid as a league. And it's a real shame. That is an opportunity lost. And when you talk to Jeannie Buss, she'll be able to really give you a good idea of how that went financially and what went on there. And she's very, very articulate and is a businesswoman. So I'm just a lowly writer. But it was a high time in my life. It's like just before that, I'd been in triathlon, and that was a very, very exciting sport to be in. It had the Hawaii Ironman, and that was going gangbusters. So I felt like I lived in the peak of that sport and then the peak of roller hockey. Two different sports in my career that triathlon is still going, but it's an individual sport, not a team sport like roller hockey was. So there isn't as much money to be lost if you're competing in a race, as opposed to trying to put a team together and have an arena and all those sort of things. But both those times in my life were very exciting. I would travel around the world for triathlon. Our magazine had a budget to do that. The magazines that I was with in roller hockey really didn't. So the farthest I would go would be to, say, Vancouver for an all-star game. But all the same, we had freelancers around the country that were excited and championing at the bit to sell their stories and photos to the magazines. So it worked out quite well for a while. And there was a faddish aspect to it, no doubt about it. I think hula hoops come to mind. They have a craze and they go. And back in the day, I remember reading about cycling and how huge that would be, and then peter out and then come back. Well, it'd be nice if roller hockey came back with somebody with some deep pockets and, say, 12 arenas to start and make it regional and then build that way. But one of the arguments back in the day was that people, especially in Canada, didn't want to be inside on summer nights. They wanted to be out. And so some of the Canadian franchises didn't attract some of the fans that you'd hope for. But on the other side of the coin, the Vancouver Voodoo did do well with getting people to the arena. So, again, it was just a fun time for me. I look back at it fondly, and I'm grateful that I had a part in it.
All right, one last question. Why? It's been 25 years. Maybe that's somewhat of an anniversary, I guess, since the founding of and the first puck being dropped. Why do you think there hasn't been a revival of it, I guess, on a professional level? I mean, because a lot's changed since then, right? I mean, you mentioned, obviously, people in the summer maybe not wanting to be indoors. Okay, maybe that hasn't changed, but certainly television has, right? Certainly arenas, have gotten much more numerous, right? Especially smaller venues that sort of cater to more, let's say, the minor league crowd size and in other events that are not top tier major league, 20,000 seaters. Do you think there's, and there's no lack of action sports, shall we say, the X Games, et cetera, in the mainstream now? You wonder why not? Is its time, perhaps, or has the ship sailed?
Well, I think that a lot of people have tried in the ensuing years to create they call them, pro leagues, more in name than in fact, but there were things like the Professional Inline Hockey League and just alphabet soup of acronyms of people who tried to do it, but without the deep pockets, it's really tough. And a lot of these players, if they're not getting paid a good chunk of change, are not willing to risk it for the injury. So the quality of the player sometimes is not as good. But there are pockets where the sport is still going strong. There's a tournament series called NARCH, the North American Roller Hockey Championships, and they still have big tournaments around the country. But when RHI started to fail, a lot of the companies that had popped up to create wheels and bearings and things like that for the league and for the players, they went under as well. So there aren't as many manufacturers. There was consolidation in the market. The big fish ate the little fish. So you don't have the sponsorship availability that you did back then. But again, it came out of the blue, and I suppose it could happen again. But where's the Dennis Murphy that's going to do that?
Oh, he might be listening to our various episodes here. So we'll put it out there to our audience. You never know. I mean, there's you mentioned it.
You never know.
That's right. There are suckers or entrepreneurs.
Or entrepreneurs.
Born every minute, right? All right. So here's your chance.
That's right.
Here's your chance to promote. Give us all the details about the book and where it can find it, and all that kind of good stuff. Because it's a hoot, and I encourage everybody to read it. This is a great story and a great part of hockey and pro sports history for sure.
Thank you. Well, it's called Wheelers, Dealers, Pucks, and Bucks, with a subtitle, A Rocking History of Roller Hockey International. One of the things I'm most proud of it, is that I did get Jeannie Buss to write the foreword, and she wrote a great foreword, and she talked about how she felt the league could have been a great long-term success, and she misses it. And, I see her occasionally too. We're still friends. And it's a paperback. It's got a color cover and black and white photos on the inside. It's actually about 328 pages with action photography in the middle and all the teams' logos and stats from the first. Oh, let's see. I guess it was the ebook that has the stats. So this book is also in electronic form, Kindle form. It's on Amazon.com. And I think it's selling for about $12 to $15 a copy right now online. And if anybody'd like to know the history of Roller Hockey International, that would be the place to go.
All right, we thank Richard Neil Graham. I like to call him Rich, but look, if you're looking for the book, make sure that you check out his full name. It's Richard Neil Graham. And the book we have been alluding to, that is as rollicking as its title and as some of the hinted stories over the last hour or so may suggest. It's called Wheelers, Dealers, Pucks, and Bucks, A Rocking History of Roller Hockey International. And this is, again, a league that ran from 1993 to pretty much the end of the decade, 98, 99 or so, a couple little hiccups near the end of its time. And it's a fascinating component of professional hockey in this country. You could make the argument that roller hockey at a professional level could indeed succeed again, given the right circumstances, as you heard. And also, for your completists out there, I want to sort of close the gap here for the opening clip that we had on the show. What you heard there was Craig Minervini and Jim Fox on ESPN, I think, for the 1996 RHI All-Star Game. It was on July 8th, 1996. And in front of a crowd of 9,406, they saw a fun and rollicking All-Star game with the West ultimately beating the East for the first time in the 3 years of the All-Star game up until that point by a score of 14-12. All right, so we've completed that little history item. And we thank Richard tremendously for opening up the door to this story about RHI, Roller Hockey International, that I am certain that we will continue to delve into with hopefully folks like Jeannie Buss who we look forward to chatting with at some point. Certainly Dennis Murphy, and hopefully a range of other people in this crazy space that we love to focus on this little show. Thank you for listening thus far. We appreciate your listenership. Mike, make sure that you check us out for all of your show interests and background. Make sure you go to goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's the place to go. You'll find out everything that's going on with this little show. You'll find all of our old episodes. You will find links to items that we talk about and mention. You can purchase books and movies and all that kind of stuff there. We get a little love when you do so we appreciate that. That's goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's also the place where you can send us some email. You can also do that separately by sending an email to hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can also follow us and interact with us on social media. On Twitter, you will find us at Good Seats Still, and on Instagram, you will find us at Good Seats Still Available. You will find a Facebook page devoted to us, and I think that's about enough ways to contact us. So you cannot challenge us by not giving you enough places and ways to interact and shout out and give us some love or some suggestions, and we love them, of course, so please do so. And one last item, of course, we want to, as always, say a hearty thanks and an amazing tip of the cap, if you will, to our friend Dr. Jerry Payne, the good doctor, at Podfly Productions, the folks, and he in particular, who put together our little pieces every week to make this show sound somewhat comprehensible. And we appreciate Jerry and his team at Podfly Productions. You can find out more about them at, of course, podfly.net. All right, I am done for this week. I thank you tremendously for listening. All kinds of fun stuff in the weeks and months to come, and we appreciate your giving us some love and support for the show, and we love hearing from you, and thanks so much for listening. And until next week, take care.